Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 57 of the Brad Carr podcast. Today, we are talking with Jack Carr. Jack is a retired Navy SEAL sniper, a New York Times best-selling author. He's also now got a series coming out based on his book, The Terminal List, and that is starring Chris Pratt, coming out on Amazon Prime. And I'm honored to call Jack a friend and a mentor. In this episode, Jack and I discuss trends in social media, how it's changing our behavior, how it's affecting free speech, and we also talk about Jack's experience transitioning from the military to becoming a New York Times best-selling author, a prominent figure in media, and his recommendations for what books leaders should be reading. All that and more. Let's go to the interview. So much has happened since we talked last, and what I would love to know is what has it been like transitioning your book into the upcoming series starring Chris Pratt?
Yeah, so obviously I have no previous experience on which to say, hey, how it was different this time or anything like that. So I mean, it's been an incredible experience to see this all come to fruition and to be involved in it from day one. Because usually, as you probably know, they like to get rid of the author right away so that you're not there on set going, you ruined my vision. And they just like to, not have to deal with that, which I totally understand. But I was so fortunate in that Chris Pratt and Antoine Fuqua wanted me involved the entire time. So they linked me up with the showrunner in December of 2019. We had our first call. So the showrunner, for those listening, in a series is kind of like a director in a feature film, in that there are multiple directors in a series. And so that showrunner is managing all of that and everything that pertains to the show. So I got linked up with him in December of 2019. We had our first conversation and just had a great time talking to him about reading and movies, and really me being a student of this genre throughout my entire life. Although that wasn't my intent, I was just enjoying movies and TV shows and books as a fan, as a reader, and it kind of put him at ease with working with me and having an author involved, because I knew that telling a story visually was going to be different than telling it on the page. And decided, of course, First Blood, 1972, written by David Morrell, still in print today. 50th anniversary is coming up here in late May of the publication of First Blood. And then the 1983 movie starring Sylvester Stallone. Two very different animals, but both awesome. And so I think when I talked to him about that, kind of put him at ease. And then we started writing the pilot episode, and he was really writing it. I was just kind of learning and putting my 2 cents in here and there. But really, we've been inseparable ever since December of 2019. We've talked every day, to include just a few minutes ago before I ran in here to jump on with you. And what a fantastic guy. David DiGilio is his name, and he could not have been better. But then he took that with Chris and Antoine, that pilot episode, and they shopped it around, and it went to Amazon and Netflix and Hulu and Apple and HBO and Showtime, and
Wow.
it got in a little bidding war between Netflix and Amazon ended up with it. But even then, there's no guarantee that anything's going to get made when something like
Right.
that happens. I mean, it's getting better. You have an A-list star already attached. You have a director attached, and you have a script or pilot episode anyway. So your odds are getting better. The further things get along, the better the odds get that things will continue to move forward. But yeah, I got to be involved in that the whole way through, to include advising on all the scripts, to include being on set. I'm an executive producer on it,
Wow.
along with Chris and Antoine and the showrunner, and yeah, see it through all the way post production into how you do the trailers and the teasers and all the rest of it, and the marketing that comes along with these types of shows. So it's been an education for me, of course, but then it's been a blast to see
Yeah.
it come through. But as a child of the 80s, I never thought it wouldn't. That's the weird part, is that I never thought I wouldn't make it through buds. I never thought that I wouldn't be a New York Times bestselling author. I never thought an A-list star wouldn't option it for the screen. So I didn't waste any bandwidth worried about these things not happening, or spending too much time thinking about the odds, or thinking about people telling me, it's impossible to get published, or the odds of making it to the #1 spot on the New York Times list, or making the New York Times list at all, or getting optioned for, or even having your project all the way through and end up on a screen. It's about 0%. So I just never really listened to that stuff, and just put it away, and worked on making the books the best they could be.
Yeah. That is one of your many superpowers. That really came through in our first interview years ago when we first talked, that this sort of ignore the odds attitude. And I wonder, you've worked with people, Navy SEALs, now in Hollywood, you've had your books, everything. How do you instill that in others or in teams that you're in? Like, how do you translate that to other people?
That's a good question, and I think I don't really think of it in those terms other than just living it. You know, sharing, being honest. In the SEAL teams, I wanted those coming up behind me to do the job better than I had done it for them. That's always my goal as an author. It's to be the best, obviously, author I can be. You have to have that product has to be the best that it can possibly be, and everything else supports that effort, of course. So I really never thought of it in terms of that specifically, other than actually just doing it.
Hmm.
My goal as a SEAL obviously was to be the best operator I could be, the best leader I could be. That means study, that means training, that means building trust up and down the chain of command. And that's the same thing I feel with my readers, is that they've trusted me with their time. So whether that's a post on Instagram, or whether it's a book, or whether it's somebody listening to the book for 13, 14 hours, or it's a guest on my podcast and a question or an exchange, people have trusted me with their time, and
Yeah.
they're never going to get that time back. So that's something I take extremely seriously, which is why I just don't post a meme, as funny as they could be. That sort of a thing. I put as much thought into any sentence on an Instagram post or a Twitter post that I do into the novel or a question for a guest, because once again, that trust with the reader, trust with that audience is something that just like in the SEAL teams, you continue to build over time. But you have to make a conscious effort to do that and be a good guardian of
Hmm.
that person's trust and time.
Yeah, yeah, you're a steward of people's attention, and you have so much attention now. Like you've you've become, this media figure and this brand and everything. And there's so many things now associated with what you're doing. And I wonder, you've talked about training and getting better at your craft and stuff. How do you feel like you've been making progress as a writer?
Yeah, I think, and I don't really take feedback from quote unquote critics, because everyone's a critic these days, and that could just keep you bouncing around and
Yeah.
chasing something that's not really being you. So I stay true to the craft, and I just want to improve that going forward. So what can I take from this last one? How can I get better? What should I have done better in the last one? Are there a few sentences here and there that stand out that maybe I would have changed had I gone back? And authors talk a lot about not going back and re-editing or thinking about their past work, but I do, because I feel like it's something that I can continue to build upon, continue to learn from as I move forward, hopefully get better. But I'm not like reading a how-to book on something. I'm not using Grammarly. I'm not using. I think I tried it once for an Instagram post, and it was just no, I couldn't deal. I don't use any of those apps that change your words or take things out to make them sound more like so and so. I guess there's some apps out like there like that, but
Mhm.
I just write. And I'm cognizant of a few traps here and there. Like, we're all creatures of habit, just like downrange. That's how we got most of our bad guys, is because they are creatures of habit. All humans are,
Mhm.
and you develop a pattern of life on them, and then you go hit them in the middle of the night, or there's a trigger. They're going to be somewhere at a certain time in a certain place because that's what they have done for the past 3 weeks or 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever it might be. Well, same thing, like word repetition. We're all creatures of habit. So I know a few of mine, and luckily Word has a thing where you can just go and search for those.
Yeah.
And But for me, it's all about just improving, but not necessarily reading any how-to books or being worried about it. It's just something that naturally happens by putting in time. Like, you're going to get to be a better X, Y, or Z if you continue to do X, Y, or Z, and but through the lens of improving. Like, you can definitely, practice makes perfect. Well, what if you're doing it wrong? Like,
Right.
you can get really good at doing it wrong. So if you realize that, though, and take steps to mitigate that, then I think you're probably going to get better, over time, depending on how much you devote to whatever that is that you are doing. And mine happens to be writing.
Yeah. And one thing that you've really mastered in writing is integrating your stories with current events. And something you've talked a lot about is, what do you think that maybe insurgent forces learned from experiences with our forces in Iraq, Afghanistan? How do you see that playing out now with everything that's happening in Ukraine?
Yeah, well, I like to say I'm hopeful that we're taking past experience, both ours and others,
Mhm.
from the pages of history, applying it going forward as wisdom. But we've managed to prove time and time again that we are not good at this for whatever reason. Senior level leaders continue to fail upward. We have a 20-year track record to look back on and see it. It's not like it's a secret. It's not like it's a conspiracy. You can look at it, and there's some great work out there, particularly the Afghanistan papers by Craig Whitlock, where he takes these interviews that senior level leaders thought were going to remain classified when they were coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and juxtapose that with the things they said in front of Congress, in
Oh,
front of committees, and those things are 180 out from one another. But once again, those failures continue to move forward, continue to retire with full benefits, and then go on and sit on the boards of different companies that have touch points with the defense industry. So it's very interesting. It gives me a lot to work with
yeah.
in my novels, actually. But we in this country, we tend to think of things in terms of 4-year election cycles, 8-year election cycles. We don't hold our senior level leaders accountable as we would a tactical level leader, or just anybody at the tactical level. If we made the mistakes that our senior level leaders made, we would be sent home, court-martialed, never operate again, kicked out of the military. Yet they get another star. And it hasn't always been that way.
Mhm.
World War II, we have George Marshall, known of course for the Marshall Plan after World War II, but most importantly are some of the things that he did before, in the lead up to World War II, during World War II, firing those people who couldn't hack it, and getting all those people whose names we know today as our leaders who crushed Japan and Germany in World War II. He put them in place. And why did he put them in place? Because other people were moved out when they couldn't hack it. He fired people time and time again at those senior level leaders. He held them accountable. And then for whatever reason, after World War II, things started to shift. We changed the name of the War Department of War, to the Department of Defense.
Mm.
And we see Korea, we see Vietnam starts changing even more, and then it just snowballs from there. And that accountability has essentially gone almost all the way out the window. But we just need to look back to World War II, which was not that long ago, and take some of those lessons, apply them going forward. But it's my hope is we can apply what we've learned to Ukraine, to the future, but we can't even go back to World War I, World War II, end of the Cold War, and talk about how Ukraine and Russia ended up in this position,
Mm.
and how the world ended up in this position. We refuse to even do that. And maybe that's TikTok brain, 15 seconds. Maybe it's the divisiveness that benefits senior level politicians. I'm not sure, but they certainly don't seem very eager to take a breath, go back in history, take the lessons and apply them going forward.
Mhm.
Apply those lessons as wisdom. That just seems to not be in the calculus whatsoever. It seems to be the next election, perhaps. And how do you get elected? Well, you keep people divided. And how do you do that? Well, you
Mm.
can weaponize social media. And what can social media do? What can tech giants do? Well, they can influence now behaviors, thoughts, even. So it's an interesting time to be alive.
Yeah. And something that you've touched on in your new book, something a lot of great authors do well, and you really do, is having villains who also have clever things to say, or have maybe even true and interesting things to say. And you talked about
Nice
divisiveness in America, and
catch.
that's often in the mouth of your villains.
I
Um,
do. I
yeah.
do. Good catch. That's one that no one's asked me before, but I've been waiting for it.
Oh,
Yes.
great. Well, let's talk about that, man.
Yeah. No, I like to do that, because it was fun for me,
Mhm.
obviously. And then it also can throw people for a little bit of a loop, because they're like, wait a sec, this sounds like something, especially if they're engaging with you and they're invested in
Mm.
you as an author today, which you couldn't really do 30 years ago, because there was no way to have a touch point with your author other than watching them on like one morning show,
Mhm.
perhaps, or
Yeah.
catch them on a radio AM thing for 5 minutes, and that was it till the next book came out, type of a thing. But today it can really throw people for a little bit, because you have something that, wait, sounds true, and sounds something like maybe the author would say, and sounds like maybe it should even be coming from a quote unquote good guy in here, but wait, it's coming from a bad guy. How is that possible? So I really like to do that a lot, and this not keep it totally black and white, because there are definitely shades of gray in life, that's for sure. And I like to explore all of those. I mean, having people that are asking questions, that are on journeys, journeys. I mean, the bad guys are on journeys, the good guys are on journeys. We're all on journeys here in life. We're not just stagnant people. And I think that's really one of the things that made these books and the characters stand out, is
Hmm.
that it's not just the same person with the same skill set just dropped into a new situation and him solving problems and adapting and moving forward a little bit. It's someone who's on a journey, who's asking questions, because we're all going forward. We're all hopefully improving. We're all hopefully asking questions. We're all hopefully adapting, learning, becoming better people, better citizens. And all the characters in my books are also on these journeys. I'm thinking about that particularly for the protagonist, for James Reese, but not just him, for everybody.
Yeah, well, it shows, and you in the tradition of great authors who have taken it to that level, it's awesome. And you mentioned having a lot of touch points. You are all over social media too. You're doing all this great marketing. How do you feel like your skills as a marketer have evolved too? I mean, you came from the military where you didn't have this public platform. How have you done this where you built up to such a great place where now people are looking to you as this leader in media?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of it was not having a background. So I didn't have baggage. So I didn't
Mm,
say, well, you know what we did at my last job? You know what we did at Apple? We did this. Or you know what I did at this last startup, well, clothing company? We did this. And this is how you do it. I had none of that. And nor did I have anybody to reach out to ask. I didn't even about that sort of a thing. So I just really looked at the space like I would at, and not just the space. When I talk about the space, I mean, in general, platforms in which you can build an audience that weren't available to authors 30, 40 years ago, even 20 years ago, even 10 years ago in many cases. And I looked at it the same way I would look at the battlefield, meaning
mm,
where are gaps in enemies' defenses? How can I adapt? How's the enemy adapting? How can I capitalize on momentum? What can I use to do that? Although now in this case, I don't have to make split second decisions under fire, and no one is depending on me to save their life, type of a
right.
thing. So it's I can sleep on it. I can think about it.
Yeah.
So it's not a, but it's the same general way to look at it, is just, hey, take a breath, look at this, apply some common sense to it, and then figure out the best way to engage with an audience, to build a readership in a way that and what's great for me is that I mean, authenticity, and people, we say it's overused and all that sort of a thing as a word, but that's because there's not really a better one for it.
Hmm.
And today you can be yourself on. If you weren't yourself online, gosh, it would be exhausting, and I don't have time for, I'm tired enough as it is,
Yeah.
I don't have time to play anybody else on online. So it's really about providing value. So
Hmm.
that's really my underlying theme when I look at it. And I never looked at it in terms of quote unquote marketing or advertising or anything like that. I didn't really look at it like that. I always looked at it in terms of providing value for an audience and a readership that's trusting me with their time. So how do I do that? How do I provide value throughout the year so that when a book comes out, that's what I need people to do to continue to write, is people buy the book, that I can continue to do what I love, which is writing.
Yeah.
So in order to do that, it's providing that value with whether it's an Instagram post, a tweet, the podcast is another example of that,
Hmm.
merchandise, whatever it is. And it's not just like I did a merch thing just to try to make a couple bucks. It's different. It's not just hitting, checking some blocks with some sort of a trinket company or whatever that is to put some stuff up there. It's not that at all. It's a lot of veteran companies. It's things I put a lot of thought into. So everything has to be next level. But really, so in general, I looked at that, but then I looked at publishing, and publishing is essentially legacy media, in that they're very
Mm,
good in what they do. They've been doing it for a long time, and they haven't had a change, haven't had to change. I mean, maybe a big scare with ebooks. Okay, well, but it proved out that not everyone wants to read something on a device that they're glued to more and more for work.
right.
Audiobooks still the fastest growing segment of publishing, but they've had some time here to adapt a little bit to that, but they haven't needed to make any huge major seismic shifts, which means they are still very good at what they do, which is that legacy media piece, something that I would not have any idea how to do. I would have no idea how to call Fox or the New York Times or the Washington Post or whatever, figure out how to talk to an AM radio producer and get on it. No idea. They are very good at that. What they haven't needed to have to do is the new media side of the house.
Mhm.
And that's what I can look at and say, oh, as a regular person, anybody can jump online and create these platforms. And if there's value there, people will come. And if you're providing the type of value that makes their lives better, well, then they'll continue to follow, and then they'll share that with their audiences. So for me, I use social media
Yeah.
as a way to say thank you to people because they took a risk on me as a new author. They shared it with a friend, whether that was at a smoke break outside at work, or if that was with their 5 people that follow them on social media, or the 35 million, or everything in
Yeah.
between. And I try to say thank you to each and every person because it means the world to me that they would do that. And it allows me to continue to write, which is my passion. And my mission is taking care of my family. My passion is writing. And those two things have come together leaving the military to create this series and these other projects that I have going on. So I still late at night, just like I still there saying thank you and hitting that heart button and trying to get back to everybody that I possibly can, because the thanks is certainly sincere and means more than I'll ever be able to express.
Yeah, well, it shows. I mean, I can remember being with you in Utah and the amount of energy that you would put in, and the consistent theme was thanks and gratitude to so many people that you've partnered with, and that now are, I think, are thrilled to be partnered with you as well. In so many ways, you've built so many good relationships, and you talk about your media too is providing value. I mean, I remember you had different verticals. You kind of had stuff for people who love action movies, stuff for people who are interested in the history of terrorism through the perspective of someone who's really seen it, stuff for people who love thrillers. Like you've done all that so well in media. And now to kind of get back to the darker side of media a little bit, a phrase that's come up a lot, Orwellian. And now you talked about changing the Department of War to the Department of Defense. We knew how now have this new organization for disinformation and governance of that. How do you see that playing out? What do you think? Is that something as Orwellian as it's made to be? Is Elon Musk going to save us all by buying Twitter?
Well, I mean, it's just so crazy. I mean, for us as citizens to take a breath and look at this, everything that's happening, it's quite extraordinary. Freedom of speech used to be something that tied us together as
Mm,
Americans, regardless of what you thought of the Second Amendment or whatever else was out there in the news as the outrage of the day. We still would stand up and we'd actually say it. Growing up, it was, hey, I'll stand up and fight and die for your right to say something, especially if I disagree with it.
mm,
That's what made us different as Americans. And now we have people that used to be essentially the vanguards, the front line of defense for the First Amendment and for the idea of standing up for someone who disagrees with you, actively now calling for censorship. And I'm talking about lawyers. I'm talking about social media companies, the media companies in general, journalists, other authors.
mm,
And that is just so shocking
mm,
to me because that is such a flip, because lawyers and publishing houses and newspapers, magazines, journalists, authors used to be that front line of defense. And now we have those same institutions actively calling for censorship and supporting people who are actively calling for censorship. It's a really extraordinary time. And that part, more than anything else that we have going on in the country, is probably the most worrisome for me, because that's is once again, it doesn't just undermine the foundation of our country. It undermines that one thing that used to bind us all together.
mm.
And I don't know how you come back from that, really. Hopefully, we have more people standing up for people they disagree with.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I hope so. It seems in your work you've always had a sense of a mission, that it's always been for something. You talk about giving value to people and providing that. How have you been able to transition between careers? I think a lot of people, they leave one career and then they're like, oh man, that was my thing. What now? Especially for veterans.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be just veterans. It can be anything.
Hmm.
That I mean, it being a special operator, being a SEAL, being in the military, obviously, as you know, I mean, it's something that you are all in on. You have to be, because you have people to your right and left depending on you. You have a mission that depends on you. You have a chain of command. You have the families of everyone attached there. You have a country, so you have this purpose, and that mission and that passion kind of give you that purpose. And I recognized that early. It wasn't a shock to me to leave. And I think it's a shock to a lot of people that can't articulate what their purpose is going forward, or that don't know their mission going forward, don't know their passion, haven't aligned the passion and the mission to give them that purpose as they move forward, regardless whether it's from the military or it could be just a job transition, could be the death of a loved one, a divorce, really any transition in life. But if you don't know your purpose going forward, you're going to have to find it eventually. You're going to wander around for a while, and wandering's fine. You have to
Yeah.
accept maybe you don't know, and that's okay. But eventually, you might need to find that purpose, or your transition might be tough. Or if you think you know your purpose, but you really haven't given it the requisite time, energy, effort that it deserves, and you can't really articulate it as you make a move. Because if you do know it, it allows you to immediately say no to an option, an opportunity, or an offer, because it doesn't fit those things that are important to you, your family, and you can say no, and then now you're wasting zero bandwidth, or maybe it's just a sliver just to say that no, and you can focus back on that passion, that mission, that purpose, or you can say yes to those things. Like for me, it was schedule. Like when I left the military, we can take it down to that tactical level. I wanted to control my schedule. I wanted to have that. So it comes down to freedom to control my schedule, and then financial freedom. Like those things were very important to me as I left the military. So if something came in and just hit, like I knew I wanted to write, but it's okay. It's good to have a couple backup plans just in case. So if something came in and it was the hit the financial button, but didn't hit the schedule one. Doesn't matter how much money was involved, no matter what that offer was, the answer was no immediately. There was no sitting down with my wife and saying, okay, we're going to have to move to, city Z, it's in this state. Okay, do we look at some schools or some houses, or I guess, yeah, sounds like a good opportunity. No, we didn't even have to have that conversation. It was immediately no.
Yeah.
And I could focus right away, back to writing. And then, but same thing, like if the schedule was freedom, but there was zero, once again, no. So that's, everybody's going to be different, I guess, in that respect. But it was important for us as a family to talk about what those things were that were important going forward. And these were mostly for the backup plans. But for me, the writing was the passion, and so everything was going in to that. And I'm lucky that I knew I wanted to do it for so long. I guess I'm lucky that I was a little naive about it as well, and then I didn't know I needed an agent. Didn't pay any attention to the odds of getting published or getting new Simon and Schuster to get this book and all that sort of a thing. I just, in my mind, I was just knew that it would happen, and I never questioned it at all. So I got to put all my energy and effort into making the book, the product, the best it could possibly be. And I wasn't worried about marketing or advertising or agents or website or social media, because I had none of that stuff, and didn't want to waste any time thinking about that stuff. It wasn't time yet. So even if you're worried about it, no matter what degree you're worried about it, that's still taking that degree away from making your product, whatever it is, whether it's a book or a painting or a widget in your garage, no matter what it is. But that's taking away from making that widget, making that sculpture, making that painting, making that book the best that it can possibly be.
Yeah. It's funny. Sometimes our friend Stephen Pressfield and I would get together, have breakfast, and I'll come and I'll think I've got all these things that I want to talk about, and then eventually we get down to, how did Jack do it? You came in with no
He's so
agent.
great.
You line up Chris Pratt. Oh, he's the best. He's the best.
He's awesome. He's awesome. Yeah, I mean, he's a big part of this. In that, before I even knew him or anything like that, I had obviously all of his books, but then specifically his books on creativity, War of Art, Turning Pro, Do the Work, Authentic Swing, and those books, they all focus on a different element of not falling prey to resistance, not procrastinating, essentially sitting down and doing the work. Because I can't guarantee that you're going to quote unquote make it, even if you do the work. But I know if you don't do the work, you for sure won't make it. And I love Stephen Pressfield. What a great guy. And I love that I misinterpreted a story that he told on Rogan, that he used to put a yellow sticky with a one-word theme for his book on his computer or his typewriter as he was, and that kept him on track. And that wasn't really the story. Once we got to know each other, he told me that he was talking about a playwright in New York who would write a one-word or a phrase that would keep him on track. But I misinterpreted that as Stephen Pressfield using one word. So I wrote revenge on my computer for the first book, and really it was revenge without constraint when I conceptualized it. But revenge, and that was directly or indirectly, everything had to tie back to that. Most importantly, indirectly. has to tie back to that. And I think that's why once the book got to Simon and Schuster, they did very little content editing. It was like,
Mm.
hey, would he say this here? Would he do this here? And then a third thing I can't remember, but very minor. And I think that's because I stayed on track, because I misinterpreted Stephen Pressfield's story on Rogan. And I've done that for all the books though, Revenge, and then the second one, Violent Redemption, and then third one, Dark Side of Man, and then fourth one, What the Enemy's Learned by Watching Us on the Field of Battle for the last 20 years. And this new one is a sniper-centric novel of violent resolution. So everything has to tie back to those themes directly or indirectly.
Yeah.
And that keeps me on track and keeps me from going down too many tangents. And I think it's been extremely helpful.
Yeah. That goes back to what you're talking about earlier with knowing what to say no to. Your laser focus on the right things is really a superpower.
Yeah, I mean, those things, those bigger ones are easier to say no to because there's no personal touch points. It's a lot of the other things that I have a hard time saying no to at the tactical level when people are asking for things or whatever. And that's just, kind of how it goes. But it certainly keeps me busy and has knocked most everything else to the bottom of my priority list. And by that, I mean staying in shape, eating right, and sleeping. Those three things are still in the exact same spot on my priority list as they were when you were out here in Utah.
Oh, funny. Well, you talked about your newest book, In the Blood, being all about two snipers. What's it like for you to get back into thinking about the technical stuff of being a sniper? And you bring so much technical expertise to all of your books.
Thank you. Yes, I have sniping and hunting and that sort of thing woven into all the novels in various ways. But in this one, I wanted to write a sniper centric novel. So to do that, I had to not fall prey to some of the tropes that are already out there. Some of the things that we've seen time and time again in books and movies, like two snipers in two different buildings or on two mountainsides looking for each other through the scopes, and then they find each other at the same time at the last second, and then they fire, and one of them moves to the scope and gets the guy through the scope into the eye. So I had to avoid that. I mean, as wonderful as it is, as wonderful as much as I love that one, that's been done. And so I had to write a sniper-centric novel without the quintessential sniper-centric scene, sniper-centric chapters that fell into that trap. So that was fun to figure out. I loved doing that. So, and I love solving problems. I love solving problems on the written page. That's what I did on the battlefield, is solve problems very aggressively on the battlefield. Here on the written page, doing the same thing, solving problems. But if I mess it up, I can go back and edit. So I don't have to, I don't have to worry too much about messing it up and not being able to fix it. So that gives you a little breathing room. And like someone told me a long time ago, they said, don't be afraid to write a bad chapter. And I took that as, hey, don't be afraid to write a bad sentence, a bad chapter, because once you do, you can go back and you can fix it. And but you have to have that bad sentence in order to edit it in the first place or get rid of it in the first place. It has to be part of a larger body of work to go back and edit or delete. But you have to have something that's malleable that you can work with and get it where you need it to be. But yeah, I love solving problems, and that's really what writing is.
Yeah. There's so many lessons in your talk about your military experience, you talk about your writing experience, your business experience. Could we possibly in the future see a Jack Carr nonfiction book with some of these life lessons?
It is possible. So I'm not going to write something like my SEAL experience or There I Was in Iraq, There I Was in Afghanistan, that sort of a thing. There's plenty of those out there by guys who did a ton more than I ever could have hoped to have done. Those books are important, I think, because they give especially kids in junior high school heroes. And when you're being bombarded each and every day with maybe some, I don't know, by people or that might not have your best interests at heart, or that want you to take a certain action, or that may not be so healthy. I think those books are important, and they'll be first person accounts when historians look back at, let's say, a battle or a time period in the military. It's not the end all be all of what happened. It's that person's perspective, and I think look through that lens, they can be very helpful to historians in the future, and obviously, to kids growing up today who need heroes more than ever. And I was very fortunate to have heroes from World War II from the pages of history. They helped mold me. Essentially, you have mentors without having a physical person there. When you go into the pages of these books and read about people who've founded the country or went into the wilderness, or World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, those are all mentors. That's the power, and even fictional ones. And that's the power of popular culture. Our most impactful export used to come out of Hollywood. And that was the lens through which the rest of the world saw the United States and saw the opportunities here. And I think that's shifted, especially over the last decade or so. But I am considering some nonfiction, and I have some ideas, and I have as written in as part of a strategic plan, but
Oh,
certainly not like my experience in the military or the SEAL teams in Iraq or Afghanistan or something like that. I bring those experiences up as appropriate. It certainly informs my writing, but I don't need to write a book about my perspective on those things. There's some other events from history that I want to go back and visit.
mhm.
Just need to get a little more efficient with my time around here and figure out how to prioritize better going forward to do some of these things that I want to do and explore.
Yeah. Well, until the Jack Carr nonfiction book comes out, what would you recommend? I could put some links in the description for maybe people or maybe parents who want to give them to their kids.
Oh, for parents that want to give them to kids.
Yeah.
Oh, so like that sixth grade, that junior high school level. So it's interesting in that the fiction that I read back then was just as impactful as the nonfiction, probably more so in those specific years.
Mm.
But now, if you go back and read those specific books, it's so interesting for me to think about it because the kids or let's say a high school or a junior high school will be like, why is this guy searching for a payphone? That sort of a thing.
Yeah.
Even the books that hold up will still have that technology of the day in there.
Yeah.
So those ones, I'm not sure how accepting a junior high or high school student will be to those books that were so impactful to me. All those ones by Tom Clancy and David Morrell and Nelson DeMille and H.A. Quinnell and J.C. Pollock and Mark Golden and Louis L'Amour and Stephen Hunter. So I don't know how
Okay.
because people essentially, I think a lot of people I know don't read those kind of books that
Mhm.
I was reading growing up. Everyone's on their devices and that sort of a thing. But the contemporaries today that are timely would be like a Mark Graney's,
Yeah.
the Kyle Mills, Vince Flynn series that he's continuing
Mhm.
after Vince's passing.
Yeah.
Brad Thor, those types of authors today are the kinds that I would have been reading back in the 80s. So those are the more timely ones where someone will be using a cell phone and not looking for a payphone
Yeah.
type of a thing. And then the history there, of course, there's been some things that have happened. You're referencing in those books in the 80s, they're referencing typically Vietnam quite a bit.
Mhm.
That was the typical protagonist background back then. It was an experience in Vietnam, either as a Marine sniper, Army Special Forces, Navy SEAL, CIA paramilitary. Today, it's going to be, hey, war on terror. It's going to be Afghanistan. It's going to be Iraq. It's going to be Syria. It's going to be Libya. It's going to be places like that, Yemen. So I think those contemporaries would be very, very helpful. And why I put so much history in the book is that in my books is that it's natural, and I love to have touch points with history. So people that are reading these books, hopefully then they can go and read the nonfiction and
Mhm.
go look up. And obviously, you don't even have to go to the library like I did back in the day. You can just jump
Right.
on here and type it in and find books on special operations Afghanistan, books on the Bin Laden raid, books on Haiti or whatever it is.
Mhm.
You can find it here and then go and order those books and read them, or go to the library and check them out. And there's a wealth of knowledge obviously out there, but there's something about having that physical book, I think, that is different than just reading something on your phone or reading something on your computer as an email pops up or as a text comes up on your phone. There's something about building that library about things you're interested in or that have touch points with things that you're interested in, whether that's leadership, whether that's a certain area of history or a time period in history, and collecting books on those, even if you're not getting to them right away, but to have them to reference, to check real quick when a chapter, and just to build that up, I think is extremely valuable and help you lead a richer, fuller life. And by richer, I certainly don't mean in the financial sense,
Yeah.
but it helps build that foundation. And foundation should be things upon which we build, not things that we're stuck in.
Mhm.
And a lot of people in the military, going back to your question about that,
Mm.
I saw a lot of people have this foundation in the military, but when they went to leave, it's like their feet were stuck in that foundation. It was stuck in that cement,
Mm.
and they couldn't pull their feet out of there and move forward and build upon that foundation, whether that was a good experience, a bad experience, positive, negative. It was still a conglomeration of experiences and lessons upon which to build and move forward. So building upon a foundation rather than getting stuck in it, I think an important differentiation.
Yeah. Yeah, that really hits home. Yeah. I wonder for that leader who is looking for a few good books, are there a handful that you'd recommend? I know in our last interview we talked about Once an Eagle. It's your favorite.
Once
Any
an
others?
Eagle, yeah, Once an Eagle. It's historical fiction, and I really like historical fiction because it's readable. There are a lot of books out there today that are even more readable than historical fiction in the past. But I used to gift Once an Eagle to leaders coming up behind me in the SEAL teams, and I put a letter there in the front that kind of framed why I was giving them this book. And it's a thick book for those
Hmm.
that have seen it. It's you have to devote some time to it so you can use it as a doorstop or as a blunt impact weapon if you need to. And then I had a letter at the end, and I'd seal that one. And then that would give my perspective on what they just read, because Once an Eagle really is a case study in leadership, and it follows two people from right before World War I all the way up to Vietnam. And one is the enlisted warrior that gets his battlefield commission in World War One, and then the other is the staff officer who's always an officer the whole time, and he's just like a little bit ahead of that battlefield commission officer, and as they move forward over their time in service. And so I gave it to Chris Pratt
Oh, wow.
for the Terminalist, and he read that. It was very impactful to him. I morphed those letters a little bit specific for him.
Wow.
And when we're talking historical fiction, man, Herman Wouk and Winds of War and Remembrance, especially today, for because going through a textbook about anything historical, kids kind of just turn it off. And by kids, I really mean anyone younger than me. Um, but you get such a lesson in World War II and what was going on in Germany, what was going on in Japan. There it takes you through the entire war, the lead up, really, the Winds of War, hence the title,
Yeah.
and then War and Remembrance that takes you from essentially Pearl Harbor all the way through to the end of the war. And gosh, you can learn so much from historical fiction like that. So those are some of my three tops. And then,
Yeah.
of course, Atlas Shrugged, Fountainhead, must reads, especially today. I'd like to go back and read them today through the lens of what's happening in our country right now. But I think if people read those two books, Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, they'd be better citizens, better prepared to deal with some of the things that are happening in this country. And then the appreciation of history, if they get it from historical fiction, great. And those three that I mentioned, Once an Eagle and War and Remembrance and Winds of War, are three of my tops. Like Killer Angels also, and about Gettysburg, and more historical fiction. Those are just incredible. So, and if that's a gateway to people to studying some other nonfiction work that might not be as engaging, but certainly as informative or more informative, then I think that's a fantastic place to start.
Yeah. We'll be sure to put links to all those in the description for anybody who's watching. And Jack, before I ask my last question, for people who want to follow along with you online, where should they look for you?
Yeah, so officialjackcarr.com is the website, and then social channels at Jack Carr USA, and I'm the most active on Instagram. There's a Twitter too, but just because of the nature of Twitter, it's it's engaging, but I spend most of my time on Instagram. There's a Facebook as well, but two platforms are enough for one person. And so I think my Instagram reposts to Facebook, but because I'm not there engaging, it's it's just there for people that happen to be on Facebook and nowhere else that are kind of curious about what's going on. And there's a LinkedIn too, but that reposts from somewhere as well. And that is what it is. But yeah, trying to make use of these platforms. But for one person, yeah, I figured when I started, I kind of had to focus on one. Otherwise, I would never get to anything else. You spend the rest of your life just doing posts. So yeah, Instagram is where people can find me most easily, I think.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'll put links to all those in the description for everybody to check those out. And Jack, my final questions, we've talked about America, we talked about free speech, we talked about healing. What do you think that looks like going forward? Is it standing up for an individual? Is it something bigger? Is it something we hope to see in communities?
I don't know. I mean, I try to stay hopeful, especially publicly. But when I sit down with my wife at the end of the day and we have a glass of wine on the couch and talk about everything going on, it's there's interesting times because there is so much power, and it is in the hands essentially of the few, and they have an interest in keeping us divided. And you can weaponize their product, and their product is in our pocket. It's with us constantly. It's not like you have to go and pick up a newspaper and then sit down and read that newspaper. It's not like you have to get the magazine or subscribe to the magazine. And for those who used to have to go and pay a journalist to write something, either maybe derogatory about something else or positive about you or your company or your party or whatever it might be. Now, those days are gone. You don't need to do that. You don't need to blackmail a journalist anymore. You have that power is here, and you can be manipulated by this, and your thoughts can be. So I think just recognizing that, regardless of what side of the aisle that you're on, that should be, especially not just parents, of course, but just citizens in general should be concerned that they have this thing in their pocket that can essentially change, modify their behavior and their thoughts. So regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, yeah, it happens to now be mostly controlled by one side, as you can, as you can tell, without too much research. But it should be of concern to us all as Americans. But I fear that it's not. It is not as concerning to those that we may disagree with, and it should be. We should be standing up for that person we disagree with. We should be as concerned that that their thoughts are being manipulated as we are that hey, our side might be doing the manipulating right now, because it might not always be that way. But regardless, that there's a direct connection between social media and tech giants and politicians and lobbyists and senior level generals and people in think tank positions, staffers. There are connections between all of those things, and that's not conspiratorial. That is just how it is.
Yeah. Well, if people want to see how your imagination has played on those ideas, they can check out your newest book, In the Blood by Jack Carr. And Jack, thank you so much for spending your time with me. I know there are a lot of things that you say no to, so I'm really honored that you chose to spend this time with me.
Man, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for all your help with everything over the years and all your support. It means a ton. And yeah, best wishes. And hopefully I'll see you in person again soon.
I look forward to it. Thanks, man.
And hey, take care. Bye.
Hey, everybody, thanks for watching this episode with Jack Carr. For more great interviews like this, be sure to subscribe and to check out the links in the description. That always helps us by supporting our sponsors. Thank you.